rationale was very helpful for me because I was able to clear my thoughts a little bit. After that, I just highlighted the words that I felt were the most important, and then I drew this body map again because I never explored this in my previous collection to the extent that I wanted to, and added a couple of new images for folding inspiration. To have some guidance for the future folds and creases, I penciled in the most interesting sections of my inspiration images. And then went on to tracing some sections of the body map using leftover pattern paper. I used the map as a guide for seams and folding directions and made 3 tracings to act as a starting point later on. Numbers that I added in here signify the order of the pattern, whereas the arrows show the direction of the officer's hands when they move. I've watched a few videos which showed the method of how the pat-down happens, and they all had a very similar structure to them, which I condensed in these illustrations. So once those initial ideas were traced, following either the front or the back of the illustration, I sketched my first options for the future look. Because I had some older underwear experiments, I incorporated them into the design as well, and also stuck more experiment photos on the right of the page for my guides. These sketches turned out to be a bit more cohesive in general and a bit closer to my idea in itself. Once the first ideas were sketched out, I proceeded with some mannequin experiments and essentially recreated the same body map lines which I had on my illustrations. They helped me follow roughly the same proportions when attempting a physical toile draft on the chosen sketch. Recently I got a comment asking how to take off all the drapery that you do in a mannequin, and I'll show you. I'll take this leather piece off because it's obstructing the view. Now that we've got all those gathers, the first point of action is thinking of how you're actually going to be attaching it to pieces. So this leather section on top is going to be answering that question for this area, but we have a question on the side. Because I didn't have a long enough piece to drape it till the end, and initially the plan was to make this drapery continuation to go over to the sleeve. Even if I were to continue from this section to this section, we would come to a question as to how this would look from the inside. Because if I were to lift it, then this fabric would be continuing here, but we would have a gap in this section. So first point of action is figuring out how I want to attach all the pieces in between each other, and this being the most tricky area, I'm going to start with that. Because the easiest way to construct it would be connecting those sections together in between of them, I'm going to add a little section of fabric here so that they would be connected between each other. After that is done, I'm going to create a separate section that probably is going to be starting with a piece of fabric from underneath the fold so that it would look like a continuous piece, but it would be finished from the inside, if that makes sense. If we have that top section all finished, I'm going to go carefully with hand stitching all over the folds because I like the placement of them and I don't want them to move underneath the sewing machine. In reality, because this is a stretchy fabric, I would have to use an overlocker, but I don't have access to an overlocker, so I'm going to be showing you how I finish them at home with a straight stitch sewing machine. That's kind of a janky method, but this is a sample anyway, so I'll see if that works out. If it looks good enough, I'll use it on the final thing as well because I don't have access to an overlocker at the moment. You'll see me go in hand stitching with all the sections separately. I'm not connecting any of them at the moment, just going through the areas. If you do that on a mannequin as well, which is the method I'm trying to apply, be careful and don't sew over the fabric of your mannequin if you have a fabric mannequin. Otherwise, you're going to have to remove the hand stitching because you don't want holes in your mannequin once you try to remove it and cut it with scissors. So be careful. Here's this little patch that was missing a section. So what I did is at the moment I just pinned it right sides together, so this would be a seam on the inside, and then I draped a little fold to go over top of this future seam, which would just hide it and make it look as if there is nothing really happening. If I were to make this a final piece, I would just use a longer piece, but now even if I make some sort of mistakes, I try to make it as clean as possible so that if this sample ends up looking pretty good, then I would be able to wear it or just sell it on a sample sale if I were to ever make one site. Now what I'm going to be doing is just hand stitching all of those edges together so that I could take it off the mannequin and then start thinking of connection methods. And because finalizing the design was more important than taking it off the mannequin, I went straight to Photoshop to get on with that. My contest application deadline was right around the corner, so what I did was I took a photo of the sample, mirrored it in Photoshop to mock up the final thing, and cleared up the areas that I would remake in the final piece anyway. I refined the shape of the sleeves, played around with the shape of the neckline, the breast and the ribcage area to find the most suitable base option. After I was satisfied with the top section, I moved on to working with the bottom section of the dress, incorporating the underwear experiments and working in some elements of my sketches. Later on, I thought of introducing some silhouette repetition into the dresses so that the whole collection would appear a bit more cohesive, and mocked up a long sleeve version, and continued with making some more options. And now once my Photoshop experiments were done, I added the original photos from the mannequin itself and glued in the symmetrical top experiments as the second step of my idea development. At the bottom, I sketched a couple of options for the back, which I admittedly wasn't really thinking about all that much when designing, which isn't the proper way of doing it. You want to definitely design in 360 normally. But in this case, I did not follow that process. Because I had the body map for reference, you can tell that these sections of the back are referencing it, so I wanted to keep that idea and introduce it to the back since I was already doing that to the front. I also added the fabric pieces from which I made the dummy experiment. You definitely want to be able to reference the thickness of your fabric when you end up going fabric shopping to know how it will behave in the final piece. If I were to buy a thinner version of jersey, then it wouldn't drape the same way as I wanted it to, for example. Next page is all about the dress, so both the top and bottom sections together. I stuck the Photoshop experience in and added notes on every single design option. Notes are the most important part of the design process in my opinion. Once the Photoshop options are all in front of you, it is crucial to write down all your thoughts of what you think went well and what didn't. I always print out all of my experiments, even the ones that I didn't like. This helps dump all your thoughts on the page and then look back at what you've already deemed unsuccessful. In case if at some point you have a similar idea, you will be able to check exactly why you decided not to go in this direction. I came to the conclusion that a simpler version was the most fitting for this collection, so I moved on to creating a very print-heavy look in the same shape as this dress. I drew the details of the shape in Illustrator and then moved on to Photoshop to add all of the prints that I'm planning on using in this collection. I absolutely love using the warp tool because it allows to distort the print in a little bit more realistic way. Of course not perfectly, but somewhat similar to what the look would look like in real life, so it's enough for me. So once all of those options were printed out, I just marked the ones I liked the best. That said, I might still change them in the future, but not after I submit the application since this particular contest requires the outcome to be exactly as the submitted sketch. I did focus on the sketch in particular and visualized a raw idea of the back option in pencil so far. Now that I had a somewhat clear idea of the dress, I went on to updating the range plan. Didn't do any changes and just introduced the two new dresses into the mix, one in white, one in print, and added all the notes on my thoughts in the current lineup. On the right of that little paper strip, I added all the action points and elements I needed to look deeper into to focus on. Because I needed to finalize my decision to submit the project for approval, I was under time pressure and I feel like that helped me a lot. I was able to make some clear-cut decisions on the final range plan and unfortunately my beloved sweater vest didn't make the cut. I'll show what my final range plan ended up looking like from the front and the back in the next video, but in the meantime I hope you enjoyed seeing my workflow. See you next time, bye!